The most controversial figure of the 21st century is Julian Assange. What motivates Julian Assange? What are his values? What is his vision? What were his observations? Julian observed censorship of abuses and history that was being erased. He observed there were many unjust acts taking place, as well as corruption. And these things motivated him to expose information to the public in order to achieve reform from this abuse and from these unjust acts. His values are derived from the American Revolution and founders like Jefferson and Madison. His guides include the U.S. Constitution as well as Enlightenment ideals. Julian's goal is to find ways to maintain an accurate, transparent, and democratized historical record. His vision includes the democratization and preservation of knowledge.
Censorship in the West is also a problem. And censorship in the West is used to legitimize censorship in other countries. And abuses in the West of Enlightenment ideals, which we should all hold dear, and the corrosion of those ideals not only impoverishes Western countries, it is also used as an excuse for terrible abuses in other countries, in particular countries that follow the common law that was set up by the British Empire. For example, abuses of libel law are used in Africa to imprison some fine journalists in severe conditions based upon precedents set in the UK. So I'm not sure how many people here are familiar with the basics of my work, and I'll just try and go very briefly through that so you can understand where I'm coming from. As a journalist and as a programmer and as someone who was involved in the embryonic internet and bringing the internet to people and bringing that great tool of information and publishing freedom to people, I saw that we could achieve a lot of reform with a little bit of work. And of course you all know this, and you should remember Solzhenitsyn's words that in the right moment, one word of truth outweighs the world. And Solzhenitsyn was referring to a world of lies. But this still is true for information across the world, and it's also true for information in the West, that in some cases one classified video can possibly stop a war, and maybe 50 definitely can. So we tried to pull together a system to automate that process, to get as much new material, censored material, restricted material, material that we thought would achieve political reform into the historic record and keep it there. And we have, in the process, become the publisher of last resort. We, in the past 3 years, have been attacked over 100 times legally and have succeeded against all those defenses by building an international multi-jurisdictional network, by using every trick in the book that multinational companies use to route money through tax havens. Instead, we route information through different countries to take advantage of their laws, both for publishing and for the protection of sources. And that endeavor has been successful in putting over 1 million restricted documents into the historical record that weren't there before. That's more pages of information than is in Wikipedia. We have gotten into the intellectual record that had been restricted.
So let's talk a little more broadly about this. I mean, in general, what's your philosophy? Why is it right to encourage leaking of secret information?
Yeah, well, there's a question as to what sort of information is important in the world. What sort of information can achieve reform? And there's a lot of information. So information that organizations are spending economic effort into concealing, that's a really good signal. that when the information gets out, there's a hope of it doing some good. Because the organizations that know it best, that know it from the inside out, are spending work to conceal it. And that's what we've found in practice, and that's what the history of journalism is.
In 1953, after Stalin died, Beria, the NKVD chief, the chief of the secret police, fell out of favor and was executed. And the great Encyclopedia of the Soviet Union had an entry on Beria, 3 pages. And the publisher sent out a replacement to say that this must be removed and be replaced by an expanded version of the Bering Strait, that body of water between Vladivostok and Alaska. And into every library that bit of paper passed and was pasted in some cases by some librarians, not in others, into the Soviet encyclopedia, ripped out in other cases, but always the glue still visible. But that's not true anymore in the West, because archives of information have been centralized on computers. The Guardian's archives are only in one place. They're not in libraries all across the nation that people look for. They're only looked for on the internet. And because of copyright legislation, they're not copied elsewhere to other places on the internet. From the archives, the electronic archives of the West, to which all information is moving into, it is gone forever. It has not only ceased to have existed, it has ceased to have ever have existed. And when you go to those web pages that have been removed from Western papers, you won't see the tear lines. You will just see page not found. You won't see anything in the index at all. We are now approaching the state of Orwell's dictum that he who controls the present controls the past. He who controls internet servers controls the intellectual record of mankind, and by controlling that, controls our perceptions of who we are, and by controlling that, controls what laws and regulations we make in society. So the specific example that I'd like to give is a litigious billionaire by the name of Nahdimi Auchi, the 5th richest man in the UK at one stage, whose birthday painting was signed by 146 members of the House of Commons. A very well-connected man, connected politically, connected in business, and connected in the social establishment of the UK. He attempted to remove, through legal threats, articles about his conviction for corruption in France in 2003 in the Elf Aquitaine scandal. And he just sent legal threats. He never went to court. And The Guardian removed 4 articles about that case from its records that were over 5 years old, and it never told its readers. They're removed from the index. When you follow links to them, you'll just see page not found. And so did the Times, and so did the London Independent, and so did major internet companies in the United States. But that's just one example of a litigious billionaire, and there are hundreds. In the UK right now, there are 300 secret gag orders. Those are gag orders that not only prevent the press from reporting corruption and abuse, they prevent the press from reporting that the press has been gagged. This is not the liberal democracy that we had all dreamed of. This is an encroaching, privatized censorship regime. And just like everything else in the West that becomes privatized and fiscalized, censorship also is not only a mechanism that is implied by the state. It is something that can be hijacked by wealthy plutocrats, by big companies, to use the coercive mechanisms of the state through the judicial system, through unequal access to the judicial system, through patronage networks, to have material removed permanently from the historical record. So in the West, and we are after all in Norway, we should not be too proud about our sense that there is no state censorship, because we have privatized state censorship. We have made it more complex and not as obvious. It is not a brute hammer anymore, it is a sophisticated device, like money laundering through Caribbean tax shelters is a sophisticated device where the brutality is hidden in its complexity. Similarly, when we see the path that countries like the United States, which once had a proud tradition of freedom of the press, is going down, we have to question whether it is really holding those values anymore and what we should do about it. Because if we don't have Western countries as a beacon on the hill for Enlightenment values, what countries are left to hold that value?
Julian also talks about how there are 3 pillars of history. And he discussed this in an interview with Hans Ulrich Obrist, which was published in 2 parts, first in May of 2011, part 1, and then part 2 in June. You can see that interview on eflux.com. But Julian says there are 3 pillars of history. The first 2 pillars of our intellectual record either have an economy behind them, or there are no active attempts to destroy them. They do not call out to me as loudly. But this third pillar of information has been denied to all of us throughout the history of the world. Julian says this third pillar of history is the information that people are actively working to prevent from entering into the record. He goes on. He says, it is suppressed before or after publication. There are active attempts to take it out of circulation. And most important, Julian says, if you understand that civilized life is built around understanding the world, understanding each other, understanding human institutions, and so forth, then our understanding has a great hole in it, which is type 3 history.
You may, those of you who are familiar here with World War II, may remember the statement that was put by the Nazis on front of concentration camps, that work brings freedom. An idea that Himmler had when he himself was imprisoned. But in my investigations of exposing documents which include many abuses by the United States military, which include the main manuals for prison camps like Abu Ghraib, Bagram, and Guantanamo, I have seen pictures on the front of those camps of their slogans. So guess which camp has honor bound to defend freedom on the front of it? The defense of freedom as a value is on the front of Guantanamo Bay. And I say, as a perversion of the truth, that slogan is worse than work brings freedom. And we in the West should be aware of that perversion and understand that the alliance that once existed between liberals and libertarians and the military-industrial complex in opposing Soviet abuses in the Cold War is gone.
Are you a subversive?
I'm sure there are certain views amongst Hillary Clinton and her lot that we are subverting their authority. But you're right. We are subverting illegitimate authority. The question is whether the authority is legitimate or whether it is illegitimate.
Do you consider the U.S. State Department a legitimate authority?
It's legitimate insofar as its actions are legitimate. It has actions that are not legitimate.
And you've gone after the ones that you think are illegitimate? We
don't go after. That's a bit of a misconception.
We don't go after a particular country. We don't go after a particular organisation or group. We just stick to our promise of publishing material that is likely to have a significant impact. The once upon a time people who stood up for Enlightenment values domestically in Western countries, that stood up for human rights and freedom of the press domestically in Western countries, libertarians, liberals, and the press itself, were in a tacit alliance with war hawks. They were in a tacit alliance with those people who opposed the Soviet Union merely for geopolitical reasons. And that alliance was to pick up a moral stick and to beat the abuses, the terrible abuses of the Soviet Union in relation to censorship. But as of 1991, that artificial alliance, that temporary alliance, has dissipated. And so now we see a split and a reversion back to a different standard where the natural interests of authority, the natural interests of intelligence agencies, the natural interests of the military is in stifling press reportage of abuse. And it has been reasserted in Western countries. In this broader framework of what we do, it is to try and build an historical record, an intellectual record of how civilization actually works in practice, now, from the inside, everywhere, in every country around the world. Because all our decisions, individual decisions, our political decisions, are based upon what we know. Humanity is nothing but what we know and what we have. And what we have can be replaced and degrades quickly. And what we know is everything. And it is our limit of what we can be. Before we embark on any particular political stratagem, we first have to know where we are. Because if we don't know where we are, it is impossible for us to know where we're going. Likewise, it is impossible to correct abuses unless we know that they're going on. So I ask you to think about the words of Machiavelli. Think about them in their negative, when he said, "Thus it happens in matters of state, for knowing afar off, which is only given a prudent man to do, the evils that are brewing, they are easily cured. But when, for want of such knowledge, they are allowed to grow until everyone can recognize them, there is no longer any remedy to be found." So secret planning is secret usually for a reason, because if it's abusive, it is opposed. So it is our task to find secret abusive plans and expose them where they can be opposed before they are implemented. Because if they are exposed by the implementation, by people suffering from that abuse, then the abuse has already occurred and it's too late.
But what about, your core values? Can you give us a sense of what they are and maybe some incident in your life that helped determine them?
I'm not sure about the incident, but the core values, capable, generous men do not create victims, they nurture victims. And that's something from my father and something from other capable, generous men that has been in my life.
Capable, generous men do not create victims, they nurture victims.
Yeah, and I'm a combative person, so I'm not actually so big on the nurture, but some way, there is another way of nurturing victims, which is to police perpetrators of crime. And so that is something that has been in my character for a long time.
With regard to his motivations, I looked at something that I had seen going on with the world, which is that I thought there were too many unjust acts, and I wanted there to be more just acts and fewer unjust acts. He elaborates on this thesis. He states, if the desired end state is a world that is more just, then the question is, what type of actions produce a world that is more just? And what sort of information flows lead to those actions? And then, where do these information flows originate? Once you understand this, you can see that it is not just starting somewhere and ending elsewhere, but rather that cause and effect is a loop.
There's a perception on the part of some people who believe that your agenda right now is anti-American.
Not at all. In fact, our founding values are those of the US Revolution. They are those of people like Jefferson and Madison. And we have a number of Americans in our organization. If you're a whistleblower and you have material that is important, we will accept it, we will defend you, and we will publish it. You can't turn away material simply because it comes from the United States.
Julian was a member of the cypherpunk movement long before WikiLeaks, and he stated in the interview with Hans Ulrich Obrist, many cypherpunks felt that the relationship between the individual and the state should be changed, and that the abuse of power by states needed to be checked in some manner by individuals. Julian is right. The most important journalism is journalism that holds government to account and holds powerful organizations to account. Julian says, until we have an understanding of how the world actually works, no political theory can be complete enough to demand a course of action. So he says he does have a political temperament, which is a combination of libertarianism and the importance of understanding. And what emerges from this temperament is holding power to account through action driven by understanding. And he elaborates further by saying that if you have a libertarian temperament, then you're temperamentally opposed to authoritarian power. And if you have a temperament that is inclined to understanding, then you want to know what power is about. So these two things combine to drive forth a position, and it's an intellectual and political position that is about understanding power to such a degree that power is not able to express its most abusive aspects. Regarding power and access to knowledge and understanding, this next quote is so insightful that I've committed it to memory, and it will hang on my wall. We need to see power from every angle if we are to understand and shape it. It is the right to know that draws forth the right to speak. And taken together, we can call these two rights the right to communicate knowledge.
Do a better job.
There is an element of the press, most of the mainstream press, nobody wants to see you prosecuted because it could affect the way that they do their business. But there's also a feeling within the community that you're not one of them, that you play a different game.
We do play a different game, and I hope we're a new way.
The point that they're making, I think, is that you're not you're a publisher, but you're also an activist.
We're a particular type of activist. In the US context, there seems to be a communist activist or something. So it's
agitator. Somebody who's more interested in...
It's a dirty word in the US.
It's a dirty word. And people think that what you're trying to do is to sabotage the workings of government.
No, we're not that type of activists. We are free press activists. It's not about saving the whales. It's about giving people the information they need to support whaling or not support whaling. Why? That is the raw ingredients that is needed to make a just and civil society. And without that, you're just sailing in the dark.
After the release of the State Department cables, Attorney General Eric Holder condemned WikiLeaks for putting national security at risk.
I think there's a real basis, there's a predicate for us to believe that crimes have been committed here. And
Holder announced that the Justice Department and the Pentagon were conducting a criminal investigation. They are reportedly looking at the Espionage Act of 1917 and other statutes to find a way to prosecute Assange and extradite him to the U.S.
It's completely outrageous.
Are you surprised?
I am surprised, actually.
But you are screwing with the forces of nature. You have made some of the most powerful people in the world your enemies. You had to expect that they might retaliate.
Oh, no, I fully expect that they retaliate.
You gathered, you stored all sorts of classified cables and documents and then released them to the world on the internet. They see that as a threat. And they want to...
Well, they see it as highly embarrassing. I think what it's really about is keeping the illusion of control. I'm not surprised about that. I am surprised at how the sort of flagrant disregard for US traditions. That is what I'm surprised about.
You're shocked. Someone in the Australian government said that, look, if you play outside the rules, you can't expect to be protected by the rules, and you played outside the rules.
No, we've actually played inside the rules. We didn't go out to get the material. We operated just like any US publisher operates. So we didn't play outside the rules, we play inside the rules.
There's a special set of rules in the United States for disclosing classified information. There is.
There's a special,
long-standing.
There's a special set of rules for soldiers, for members of the State Department who are disclosing classified information. There's not a special set of rules for publishers who disclose classified information. There is the First Amendment. It covers the case. And there's been no precedent that I'm aware of in the past 50 years of prosecuting a publisher for espionage. It is just not done. Those are the rules. You do not do it.
If they let you get away with it, then they are encouraging...
They will have to have freedom of the press.
Then they will encourage that it's encouragement to you or to some other organization.
And to every other publisher. Absolutely
Right.
correct. It will be encouragement to every other publisher to publish fearlessly. That's what it will encourage.
Publish information much more dangerous than this information.
If we're talking about creating threats to small publishers to stop them publishing, the US has lost its way. It has abrogated its founding traditions. It has thrown the First Amendment in the bin because publishers must be free to publish.
Last question, Julian. When you think of the future then, do you think it's more likely to be Big Brother exerting more control, more secrecy, or us watching Big Brother, or it's just all to be played for either way?
I'm not sure which way it's going to go. I mean, there's enormous pressures to harmonize freedom of speech legislation and transparency legislation around the world, within the EU, between China, the United States. Which way is it going to go? It's hard to see. That's why it's a very interesting time to be in, because with just a little bit of effort, we can shift it one way or the other.
Well, it looks like I'm reflecting the audience's opinion to say, Julian, be careful and all power to you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Julian has something to say about the creation of a true intellectual or historical record. What goes into the intellectual record should actually be everything, because everything in the world eventually, in one way or another, affects everything else. With digital archives, with these digital repositories of our intellectual record, control over the present allows one to perform an absolutely untraceable removal of the past. More than ever before, the past can be made to completely, utterly, and irrevocably disappear. Parts of our intellectual record are disappearing in such a way that we cannot even tell that they ever existed. So what is to be done? I want to make sure that WikiLeaks is incorruptible in that manner. We have never unpublished something that we have published. All creative works that can be put into digital form can be linked in a way that depends on nothing but the intellectual content of the material itself. No reliance on remote servers or any organization. It's simply a mathematical function on the actual intellectual content, and people would need nothing other than this function. Julian understood a consistent way of naming every piece of intellectual creation, anything that can be digitized. He says if we have a blog post, sonata, film, classified document, it will have a unique name. And if the post changes, the name will change, but the post and the name are always completely coupled. And it's not possible to change the underlying document without changing the name. And I think it's very important, a kind of indexing system for the Tower of Babel, or pure knowledge. Julian's vision is a democratization of knowledge, which is access to knowledge for average people that the world has never known before. And this is the real reason why power is challenged by him, because his vision will change the balance of power.
Names. You've been characterized as a hero and as a villain, a martyr, terrorist.
I'm not yet a martyr.
Right.
Let's keep it that way.